I'm Sunny Cain, and you're listening to the next Faith-Filled Step right here on Pilgrim Radio. Each week, we'll explore simple, practical ways to respond to God's Word in our everyday lives. Let's choose wisdom over willpower, purpose over pressure, and take the next faith-filled step together. One day, one moment, one decision at a time. Have you ever been in a season where a storm hit the shore of your life? And maybe when you're standing in the midst of that storm, wave after wave coming, maybe you try to rise and it feels like every time you stand up, you get pummeled by another wave. Or maybe it feels like you actually have multiple storms converging on the shore of your life at the exact same time. These seasons can be exhausting. They can be disillusioning. We can go to places of, moments of mountaintop victory within them, having complete faith, knowing that God is working. And then we can swing the pendulum completely to the other side and go to the place where we start believing that we are being punished for something. We start questioning where God is. Sometimes we even question our faith. The human heart can hold a whole host of emotions and reactions. I also know that sometimes when the storms come, we do everything that we can to duck and hide, to run from them, to ignore them, to pretend that they don't exist. Well, I came across a book recently by a man by the name of David Stine. It's called The Way of the Ox: Endurance to Thrive in the Storms of Life. Now, Dr. David Stine is a visionary leader, strategist, a consultant, and executive coach, and he spent many years in pastoral ministry. But in his own quest to advance during tough times, he found great solace and encouragement in considering the life of an unsuspecting creature, the musk ox. And I brought him on to share with you today, and I think you're going to value what he has to say. With that, here's my conversation with Dr. David Stine. Well, David, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today on the next Faith-Filled Step.
Sunny, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate being on your show.
Before we help our listeners get to know you a little, I love asking this question because I actually think it helps us get to know people in a really great way, and that's this. First, let me give you a bit of context. We know that there is this difference between knowing God personally and simply knowing about him, right? So in other words, we come to know him by name. So I would love to hear what name of God or aspect of who he is most resonates with you and why.
Wow, that's a great way to start and putting me in a great spot there. I would agree. That was the transformation in my life. Was I had heard about him from my grandfather. But then coming to know him personally and that he was really interested in my life, probably best would be him as provider. And I think every husband out there that has, especially if you have children and if they're getting older in age like mine, I've got 4. And they're getting into that college age, Sonny. So, it's an expensive season. But knowing him as provider, especially as a leader of a family, has been just expanded my gratitude, my appreciation in every way. Of course, we have all appreciation for Jesus and what he's done in each one of our lives. But whenever God meets us as provider, I don't know. It just speaks maybe a love language that I have because I so desperately want to provide for my family in a positive and healthy way. And he's just met me over and above time and time again. And I think it's a big part of our walk of faith to know that God is going to meet you not just in the way, like I'm saying, provider, but he's also our healer. He's also our leader. He directs our steps. So Great question. I hope I answered that all
You
right.
did. You answered it great. I always just love to see where people go with that because I think different names resonate with
Yeah.
different people. And sometimes it's based on different seasons that we walk through. So I
Mhm.
just think it helps us get to know you a little bit. But I do know for our audience, they might be meeting you for the very first time. So
Yeah.
as we're getting started here, can you tell us just a little bit about yourself and maybe about the work that you do?
Yeah. Well, I got saved in college. And in college, I was the kid that was in the fraternity life and didn't know God, and whenever I got saved, it was a real radical conversion for me. And my friends started calling me pastor and reverend and stuff and all that. Even baptized several of my fraternity brothers in the swimming pool in my apartment complex. But it was actually a few years before I accepted the official call, not just their call, but the official call into ministry. And I served in pastoral ministry for over 20 years, and even pastoring a church that my wife and I had founded in Washington, D.C. And we pastored that for 10 years. From that time, we transitioned out and served another ministry in California. Mostly, I led their media company and did that for many years. I started getting phone calls, though, Sonny, about how to help churches raise money for capital campaigns. And that had been something that I had, honestly, it wasn't my favorite thing to do, but it had just been something that I had been tapped for and had been successful with. And people would say that I created campaigns that weren't about money, they were about vision. That's what I do today. And I lead a company called Advanced Partners where I do just that. I help pastors create campaigns, capital campaigns, and help them to really see the vision that they have, that the Lord has given them, lived out by rallying individuals around them so that they can have the resources they need to usually build a building or to take new ground or to buy a property. And it's been a real joy of mine. And I've been able to work with a lot of pastors to do just that.
Awesome. Well, I know
Yeah.
today we have the opportunity to talk about your new book that just released in the
Yeah.
past few weeks here. It's called The Way of the Ox: Endurance Through the Storms of Life. And I know before we got started today, I told you that I saw the cover with the ox on it. And
Yeah. Got it right here.
immediately, yes, and immediately I went, oh my goodness, I got to check out this book. But the title itself, The Way of the Ox, I'm curious why that title? Why did the ox grab a hold of your heart for this particular subject?
Well, Sonny, I think you'll appreciate this because this is probably a less spiritual story, but it has to do with doing a husbandly duty of going with your wife to Home Goods. Come on, this is an important aspect. We're not told about this before we get married, but this is a key thing that we need to do.
Well,
So,
the line alone, it's not just for your spouse, but to get through that line, I mean, I
that's
actually
right.
think it's a man must have prayed for patience if God sends him to Home Goods because you're going to wait a long time.
There's a few of us, and we stand strong together, like the ox. But I was actually walking through with her, toddling behind, and she pointed at this picture that she really loved. And it sounds like it might be a picture in your home as well, as we talked about before. And she said, I really love this picture. What would you think of having this in our home? And as I looked at the picture, I just, with a blank kind of stare, I said, babe, I don't even know what animal that is. And so I took a picture of it, and we did not buy it that day, but we did get it afterwards. And I took that picture home and I looked it up, and it was an animal that I had never heard of called the musk ox. The musk ox, as I dove in, you can tell I'm a little nerdy with research and stuff like that, but dove into learning about it. And it is an animal that lives in the Arctic Circle, and it has been around forever, evidently longer than we have. And it's in one of the coldest places on Earth. And as I learned a little more about it, I learned that unlike every other animal in the Arctic Circle, when a storm comes, this is the only animal that actually goes into the storm instead of flee from the storm like a normal thinking animal would do. There's some amazing benefits in why God has wired this animal to do that, but it's a little counterintuitive to go into a storm. And I started developing a premise from that I feel like the Lord has called you and I to actually, whenever a storm comes, to actually move into the storm that He is allowing our lives to be affected by, and to trust that He is with us in that storm and to move in it with Him. Again, I mentioned there's some amazing benefits that happen whenever the muskox goes into the storm, and we can talk about those. But
Yeah.
that's kind of the nutshell story of why I picked this ox as my muse for the book.
That almost feels like a God thing. I mean, that you would go to Home Goods and see a picture, and God, knowing your research brain, that you would go down this path. I am curious, was there something happening in your own life at the time, like a storm that you were walking through personally, that caused this to really jump out at you?
It was, and great intuition on that, Sonia. We had just transitioned out of the church that I pastored in Washington, D.C., which grew to become a very large church. We had 3 locations across the D.C. area, and I was having some health issues 10 years in. And we didn't know what exactly was going on. It took probably a month of seeing various specialists to find out. And I had, the time walking through that Home Goods, I had just been diagnosed with something called Graves' disease, which is a thyroid condition, which is a little more known now. At the time, I had never heard of that. It sounded like the worst thing ever. By the way, if you're going to name a disease, that is the worst name possible, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. Graves. Like, does this mean death is for sure coming for me right now? I mean,
Exactly.
it's a horrible name.
Yeah, come to find out, it's just the last name of the guy that discovered the disease. But it took a couple years to really get through that. And I did have to leave pastoral ministry in that church as a result of that diagnosis. And eventually had to have my thyroid removed. Actually, it wasn't removed. It's still in there, but it was ablated with, they basically kill it with radiation treatment. And I'm now living in very good health. I have to take one little pill every day, which is just the thyroid hormone. But at the time, ministry was all I knew. And pastoring this church was our dream. We'd known that we were going to launch DC Metro 9 years before we actually started it. And we were pastoring for 10 years. My wife often tells me, she was like, we were just getting to the place where we could actually enjoy the fruits of our labor. And that was when we had to step out of ministry. And I ended up in a hospital on and off for that next 2 years. So it was a challenging time. Yeah. It was hard to see what the Lord was doing, and to know that I was learning about the muskox, which goes into the storm willingly. And so I thought, really, okay, here I go. I feel like the Lord is telling me I just need to go through this and trust Him. And we were better off on the other side of it. Thank Him.
As we always are when it comes to the things God walks with us through. My heart is with you in so much of what you talked about, just having a dream that you thought was exactly what God had for you, that being in ministry, right? So you're doing it for the Lord, and then it kind of flips upside down and you end up going in another way. I know that out of sorts kind of feeling very well. My husband and I walked through a journey like that as well. And the chronic sickness happening at the same time. We had a daughter where she was diagnosed with POTS, but boy, do I understand the pressure of almost multiple storms that are coming at you. And I would say for our listeners, they too have been in seasons where they are facing maybe not just one storm, but it feels like every time, like, what do I do when I've got a hurricane and a tornado and I've got hail coming down at the same exact time? And you're actually calling us to run directly into it instead of shrinking back. Why is that so hard for us?
You mentioned hurricane. I grew up in South Louisiana where we do not stand and face hurricanes. The people that do that do not make it very long. And we run from storms. And that's just basic human instinct. But we know that the Lord works in mysterious ways. And one of the things that I believe He calls us to do is that when storms come, we don't shrink back from them. Even as Jesus said, you're going to be overcome by the world, but I take heart, I have overcome the world. I think that's a hand-in-hand partnership that He's offering to us to walk with Him into those challenging times. I've said it like this. I don't think that God is so much interested in our comfort as He is in our heart. He will stop at nothing to get to our heart. And in the process of getting to our heart, He does work a system of strengthening our faith, because our heart and our faith are tied. They are lockstep with each other. And whenever He can get to our heart, it's really that He's refining our faith, as we know in Scripture teaches about the refiner's fire. Like, why would God ever allow heat to be applied to my life? And Scripture shows us that He is trying to make our faith of greater worth than gold. And to increase the value of gold, as over the last few years, as we've all seen the value of it, I think Sonny, reached $5,500 an ounce. I mean, you can hold an ounce on the tip of your finger, really. And for Him to increase the value of us, He has to remove those impurities off of our life. And that's exactly what He did to me in this process. There was a refining that happened that made my faith grow in Him. In other words, I could trust Him more on the other side. But unfortunately, there was some heat that had to be applied for Him to have full access to my heart and increase the value of my faith.
So for the person, we're going to get into talking all about, I want to talk to you about your 5 sacred keys, as well as just a little bit more about what you've learned about the musk ox. But for that person who heard us both mention that we walk through multiple storms at a time, just to help keep them hanging on in this conversation, what is something that you would say to encourage them as they're facing maybe not just one storm, but multiple?
I just before the show, I jotted down 5 steps. I really felt like this was going to be for someone, and you're asking the exact question. There's really 5 steps whenever you encounter, I'll call it a challenge, a storm, a crisis. And these have worked for me, and I believe we find these in Scripture. And I think the 5-step process, if I can, it just really quickly is, the first step is just, you got to tell God how you feel. I think even as believers, oftentimes we want to refine the way we talk to the Lord in difficult times. It's almost like we don't want to upset Him. And I've been there. And I think the conclusion I've come to is that God actually wants me to have the most authentic conversation that I possibly can. And it all starts with really telling God exactly how I feel. He can take it. He's a big boy, we would say in the South, right? He can handle it. But there's something about getting it out. Just getting it out, and maybe you're going to hear yourself saying it and know exactly where you're at when you do. I think the second thing, after you've told God how you feel, is you got to see God for who He is. And by that, I mean, just remember who He is in your life. Remember maybe how He came through for you the last time. We have had a house for sale over the last month and a half, Sonny, and I'm sure you've been there, and it can be a tedious process where you're just kind of praying, God, please come through. There's always moments where we think this house is never, ever going to sell, ever. And it's the economy, or it's just our mind playing tricks on us, or we've watched too much news. So we think the sky is falling. Well, we got a contract on our house on Saturday. And I just remember thinking, God, you did it again. You did it again, which is what testimony means. It means, God, you came through for me last time. Would you would you just do it again? Would you do it again? And I think that comes really from seeing God for who he is. I don't want to get too long with this, but the third one
No.
is really simple. And this has to do with us just talking to God again and just ask him for the next step. We may not see where we need to get through the entire forest, the entire storm, the entire challenge, but he is so faithful to reveal the next step to us, Sonny. If we just ask, he'll let us know. And that's all we need to be responsible for is, Lord, what's the next step? And then once he reveals that to us, let's take that next step. And then after that point in time, you can ask him for the next step. But really all we need to do right now, what's our role in this storm? Is just ask him. And then the fourth one, and this is really knowing he's still with us, and that is to just trust him for his strength. Even taking that next step, if you're in a storm, can feel like the most impossible thing, even when we know what to do. And you've been there before, Sonny, I know in my life, with that diagnosis, even knowing what the next step was, knowing about all the other concerns I had, like we were leading this church, like, what are the people going to say? What are we going to do for finances for my young family? How am I going to get through this physical ailment right now? All that stuff needs to be set aside just by saying, God, I'm going to walk hand in hand and trust you in your strength, even taking this next step. And I think the fifth one is where the ox really comes in. And that is when the ox goes into a storm, it never refuses to give up. They follow this same pattern after pattern after pattern. They just keep doing the same thing. Every time that winter comes, they go into the storm without fail. All the other animals are running away. All your other friends might be saying, avoid this storm, do what you can to not go through this. And you could say, well, I'm going through it with the Lord. I'm relying on his strength. And they'll say, don't do that. No, trust me, just go into that storm. Refuse to give up, because on the other side of this, God's got great blessing.
Yeah.
Just like he has for the ox, Sonny, he has for your life. I know he's done it in my life as well. So those are the five.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was long, but
No
I knew that was
apologies.
for someone today because I just jotted it down in my notes here.
I always want us to take time to go where Holy Spirit leads us.
There you
And
go.
so I trust that there is a listener who needed to hear that in that exact moment. And I would encourage somebody who is facing a storm, and even if you are not, we know that none of us is exempt from storms in our lives. And I would encourage you to pick up this book. I have not got to read it through in its entirety, but I got to thumb through it. And I'm telling you, there is some interesting facts about this ox. I could not believe how cold they can get and live. And then you talked about something which I don't even know how to pronounce. Quivit? I don't know.
You know what? That's how I would say it as well.
Okay.
But I was corrected the other day that it's kiviot, and I wrote a book about it. So that's how I call it.
So can you tell our listeners, tell them how cold these guys can get, but also tell us what you discovered about that kiviot and how it could apply to our lives.
Thank you for picking up the book, by the way, and talking so fondly about it. The idea of kiviot is really interesting, and it does apply to our lives. One of the many facts that I learned about the muskox that was so encouraging to me, again, as I'm walking into a storm myself that I can't avoid. It's a health crisis. And but as the muskox turns and heads into the winter, it has an outer layer that is what you would see in the picture. It's called guard hairs that really protect it from the elements. They're thicker hairs that do keep it warm, but underneath those guard hairs is this kiviot, and it only grows once the temperature begins to drop, which is interesting. So it's designed to grow whenever a storm and the winter cold which it can. It can survive. Scientists say that it can survive up to negative 167 degrees, if you can imagine. I think our lungs freeze at negative 60 degrees.
My goodness.
So this is not a place that humans can be without significant protection. This kiviot, though, grows underneath that outer layer, and it gets quite significant on the inside. Also, kind of an interesting fact, it is said to be the warmest wool on planet Earth, and it only grows on muskox, oddly enough. It's a grayish hair that develops, which made me think of the term or the phrase silver lining, that there's a silver lining underneath. But interestingly enough, as it goes in, it grows and grows and grows all winter. And then sure enough, as soon as the spring temperatures hit, that kiviot actually falls off the muskox, almost like clockwork. And it is of the most valuable wool on earth because of its rarity, but also because of how warm that wool is. And you can get, we all like cashmere because of how warm that is, but kiviot is actually several times more expensive than even cashmere. So it's quite interesting that it only grows when we're going in. And our parallel for us is that God has unexpected blessing. He's got unexpected protection for us. He's got unexpected provision for us as we choose to walk with him in what he is allowing to happen in our life, which he is, remember, behind the scenes, building our faith. He's doing something great on the inside of us as we walk into the storm that we could not do for ourselves. And he's providing kiviot on the way.
I mean, I can't help but think of all the correlation to things that we're taught about considering it pure joy when we face trials, right? Because it's growing kiviot, right? It's only developed through that suffering. And yet I'm immediately like, where's the remote? I got to fast forward this season of my life. So so cool. Now, I know you also learned, you talk about how the musk ox are relational creatures. And I'd love to hear you talk about what you learned from them and how it might help us advance in our relationships and why we need this in hardship.
I love it. They move in herds, and it was called a musk ox by European explorers in the late 1800s whenever they saw them for the first time. These explorers just assumed that they were ox because they look similar to an ox. But an interesting thing about the musk ox is it's actually part of the sheep family. It's actually not an ox at all. And they are very much like sheep. They herd together. We know you and I are referred to as sheep. Of course, Jesus referred to as our shepherd. And they respond very similar. In fact, there's several herds that have been moved to Alaska, and each one of them has a shepherd that can call by name, each one of them, and very similar. They are relational creatures, and you could say that they're in a sheep herd, they're in a herd of musk oxen. And whenever the cold does come, let's say it gets to that negative 167 degrees, what they do is they form a circle, and they do this whenever a predator comes as well. They form a circle with the young on the inside, then the female, and then the larger male oxen would be on the outside as kind of a protective, not only just a way to stay warm, but also to ward off predators that may try to take their young. And it's this relationship that they have that actually lasts their entire life. So if they're born in that herd, they stay in that herd, they grow up in that herd, they find their mate in that herd. All of those things happen because they are just an amazing relational creature. And for us, of course, that begs the parallel that you and I are created as relational people, and like sheep, we stick together. And when adversity comes, we have other people that we're in relationship with that can provide that encouragement, support, protection if needed. So yeah, they are very relational creatures, and I think it's a great parallel for you and I, just to be reminded.
Well, and it's interesting. Hardship has a way of actually making us want to move more towards isolation. And so for somebody who's there right now, who's like, I get that people are important, but I don't have the energy because this storm is so big, how would you encourage them today?
Well, I would encourage you, just the one that Jesus says to go out of the 99 is the one that's isolated, the one that's by itself. Leave the 99 to go after the one. There's really an all-out press that the Lord goes into whenever you are isolated and by yourself. He wants you to be back in the fold, we could say. And I would encourage you really to find a community of believers. There's so many benefits from having those relationships in your life that can point you towards what God is doing in your life. When we find that we have relationships, which we all should have relationships that are believers as well as non-believers that we're encouraging to jump in with us as part of the fold as well. But oftentimes, if we only hang out with people that are not going the same direction that the Lord would encourage them to go, then what happens is they can be detractors whenever we do hit that adversity in our life. We need people that are going to point us towards the Lord. And if we're not surrounded by those individuals, then we could be given advice that would pull us away from maybe even the Lord's best for us in those times. And I found, Sonny, when we're in those challenging times, when we're in the times of storm, it can be the times where we're the most impressionable by other people. And that's all the more reason why we need to be surrounded by people that are pointing us to God's best for our life, that are pointing us to God's will for our life, and being able to even point us backwards and say, remember how he came through for you last time. Those are the individuals we really need to surround ourselves with. So if you're out there and you do feel isolated, I would encourage you, find a community of believers that you feel a kindred spirit with, that you feel, these are people that you could really see yourself running with. I guarantee you won't regret it. Those are the people that are going to get you through and help the Lord get you through the storm that you're in, or the future one that is already ahead of you.
I'm so glad you mentioned how impressionable we are in those places, because when we're in that pattern of isolating, today's day and age, when we're in that impressionable place, so often we're turning to social media. And I'm telling you, your algorithm will work to find you an article to lead you astray. I mean, it's crazy how that can happen. So people really do matter. So thank you for kind of painting that picture with the ox. But there is a part of your book that I wanted to hear just you speak to, because I think it would just bring such beauty to the picture of the Father's heart for us. And that is when you are describing a story about treehouse masters and a 9-month odyssey. Now, you're specifically talking about advancing in prayer through these storms. But this story was about how your kids believed you could do anything and how that actually shaped how you saw God. Would you tell our listeners this story? And what did that teach you about God's heart toward us in these seasons?
Well, I'm sure your listeners, Sonny, probably have come across that reality TV show, or as reality as it could be, called Treehouse Master. And it's this amazing man. I forget his name now. It's been a couple years, but he goes around the country building dream tree houses for individuals on their property. And my kids I would watch this show. I think it came on every Thursday night, if I'm not mistaken. And they kept talking about how we need to do this. We need to do this. And they were all at the time probably 12 or 13 and under, 4 kids, and 3 boys and a little girl as our youngest. And my kids just decided one day that they were going to start building the treehouse. So they start building this treehouse, and I can see immediately that it's a disaster waiting to happen. They're up in a tree. They're little kids. They've got hammers and nails. Thank goodness there wasn't a saw out yet. And so I thought, okay, well, they have opted me in, and I'm going to have to tap in as their dad. And so we set out to build this tree house, and I got so excited about it because I thought, okay, I'm going to do this with them. They're already started on it. And sure enough, about a week in, I could not get one of them to help me with this treehouse. They were great starters, but not finishers yet. So yes, it did take me about 9 months to get the entire dream that they had already laid out. This was not my architectural design, but theirs. And I did abbreviate it quite a bit because they wanted a kitchen and a bathroom and all that. I'm like, no, this is going to be a treehouse. If you saw it right now, Sonny, you would laugh. But it did take me forever to get this treehouse done. And I think for me, it ended up being a beautiful story between my kids believing that I could do anything and how I really needed to be kind of checked on what I believed that the Father, not only what he could do, but the real thing was what he would do for me. And it took me on a journey of each weekend, whenever I got out there, to do the next step, to put the roof on, to put the door in, to put the hammock on, to install the beds in because they wanted to sleep out there. It was just a further reminder that, a good father is willing to go through quite a bit just so his kids could enjoy it. This wasn't something that they needed. This was something that my whole goal was just that they would have a good time out there. And to think that our Father loves us so much that he would take time and really focus on building something in our life, not something that even we need, but he would just do it for us just so we could enjoy it. And I don't know if I retold it that well, but
No,
that was a fun 9-month journey, and I needed a lot of reminders.
Sometimes we're so focused on survival mode in the seasons where we're having to face a storm. And so when you placed it in your book, it was this exactly what you're talking about, a reminder that God delights in us. And I could almost see your children with anxious expectation peeking out at Dad building this for so long. And I think that in and of itself is encouraging for somebody who's walking through a storm to not just trust that God is there with you, but that he desires good things for you in the midst of that. So I thank you for going there. Man, I could talk through so many of the different places that you went. You talk about the faith of your father. You talk about your prayer life. You go into how to advance in our relationships, how to go through discouragement. And so I say all of that so our listeners will know you've got to go pick up David Stine's book, The Way of the Ox, Endurance Through the Storms of Life. And where can they pick that up, David?
Yeah, thank you again for your kind words about the book, Sonny. You can really pick it up anywhere that books are sold. But yes, would love for you to pick up a copy. Again, I wrote this in a challenging season of my life, and I set out to write a book on Christian grit. And I feel like that's really what ended up happening with the Lord's help and the example of the musk ox. So if you're in a storm, if you're in a challenging season or a difficult time, I wrote this book for you. And I feel like the Lord not only inspired me, but walked me through every step of the way writing it as well, so that we could get this encouraging word in your hands.
Well, we would not be called the next Faith-Filled Step without bringing our program to a close by simply asking you, for the person that you wrote this book for, if you were to give them a tiny ox step today, what would that be?
Well, I think whenever we're in a storm, the initial decision is, am I going to do everything I can to avoid this storm? Or am I going to turn my shoulder, trust that the Lord's got my hand, and walk into the storm? And we've all tried to avoid storms of life in our own world. And there's an anxiety that comes over that process. And I hate to say that a storm that the Lord allows would be his will for your life. He doesn't cause a storm, but he allows it, and he uses it for our good. He works all things together for our good. So if you would just make that decision that I'm not going to fight the Lord on this, but I'm going to trust the Lord, Sonny, for me, that lowers my anxiety a ton right there. That this is part of his plan, that I can trust that he is adding some caveat on the way in this journey, and that springtime is on the other side of this storm, which is what the muskox finds. The muskox, because all of its known predators run away from the storm, it is actually by itself in that spring grass, all by itself. It's also, Sonny, the time that they have their young. So their babies actually grow up with no predators in those really susceptible early days of their lives. Is that amazing?
Yeah.
It's only the provision of the Lord to have us go through a storm to get to the springtime first, so that we get the spring grass and our young grow up in a safe place. Amazing. So I know that may not be the answer that you're wanting to hear, which would be that I'd get to the second step is after you decide to turn, just trust that the Lord is with you and this too is going to pass. He's going to get you to the other side. You're going to get to the springtime, and he's got great blessing on the other side of this challenge.
Well, David, thank you so much for your time with us today and for investing in our audience here at Pilgrim Radio on the next Faith-Filled Step.
So happy to be with you, Sonny. Thank you again for having me on. And thank you also for reading the book. And I think your husband is next to read it from what you told me.
I mean, he sees a lot of books come in and he's like, I'm next on this one. So yeah, so we're all about that. Well, thank you so much, David. God bless you. And we're praying favor over you and the launch of your book.
Thank you so much. Appreciate you, Sonny. God bless.
Well, friend, if you tuned in late, our guest today was David Stine. And perhaps you're listening to us on podcast, whether that is through Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, YouTube, or maybe you're listening through the Pilgrim Radio app. We want to encourage you to subscribe, as well as if you value our content and you would love to see this get into the hands of more people, would you do us a favor and give us a review? That helps us reach more people with faith-filled, gospel-centered content. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, share this episode with them so that they too can be encouraged by the life of a musk ox and to face the storms of life with God by their side. Well, thanks for listening to the next Faith-Filled Step right here on Pilgrim Radio. This week, look for one way to respond to what God is revealing in your life. One day, one moment, one decision at a time.